This evening's talk is on the White Stork project. It was advertised as Lucy Groves, but I believe she's left the project and gone to other things. And Matt Phelps, who's also worked on the project, agreed to step in at relatively short notice and take over the presentation on the White Stork project. Okay, Matt, over to you. Cheers.
Great, thanks very much, Alistair. Hopefully you can all see me and hear me. I'm just going to start sharing my screen so you can see my presentation, hopefully. Right, well, yeah, thanks very much, Alistair, for the introduction, and thanks very much for inviting me to speak to the group. My name is Matt Phelps, obviously, as it says on the screen, and for about the last year, I've been working as a safari guide and on the White Stork project, based at the Knepp estate in West Sussex. So those of you who know that part of the world, it's sort of between Horsham and Worthing, just south of Horsham, really. And I'm going to explain tonight all about the White Stork project and what's been going on with it, basically, because I'm sure some of you have heard a little bit about it, or maybe you know quite a lot about it. But hopefully tonight will answer all the questions you might have, hopefully. So a little bit slow on the slides, this one. So the White Stork project started in 2016. It was launched at Knepp, was the sort of still is the hub of the project. Charlie Burrell, who owns Knepp, was one of the kind of sort of the sort of geniuses behind the project. He was one of the people that came up with this idea of reintroducing white storks to the UK, along with people like Derek Gow, who you might know from his rewilding work in the southwest of England. He actually co-authored the feasibility study, which was published a few years before, and approval was given by Natural England, etc. I'll go into more detail on this later. But essentially, it's a partnership of private landowners and conservation organisations. And the aim of the project is to re-establish a self-sustaining population of white storks in the south of England by 2030. The target is actually 50 breeding pairs in the UK by the end of this decade. So we've got 7 years left to achieve that target. The core area, as I say, is Knepp, although there are other sites as well, which I will talk about. And the initial releases to establish the local breeding populations have already been undertaken. And in fact, we already have some breeding taking place now as well, which again, I'll talk about a bit later on. Each year at the moment, we're still supplementing the population with a release of captive bred birds every year. So we're probably coming towards the end of that. The initial sort of finishing point was 2023 for the releases, which is obviously this year. But we'll make a decision this year on how many we're going to release and sort of how the project is doing. It's about 250 storks now that have been released as part of the project. And another big part of the whole idea behind the project is kind of using white storks as an emblem for nature connection, if you like. So you may have heard this idea about rewilding being not just rewilding wildlife, but rewilding people. So getting people back in touch with nature. And it was sort of decided that white storks were an excellent bird with which to do that with, because they're such an iconic species, such an easily recognizable species. So a quick sort of overview of some of the project partners then. So obviously the Knepp estate, as I mentioned, this is for those of you who don't know, I won't do a sort of full history of Knepp now, because that's a whole other story, a whole other talk that I do as well. But the Knepp estate basically was traditional farmland until about 22 years ago. And then it was gradually rewilded, and it's now basically one of the most important rewilding projects in the UK, and has got some of the most important populations of purple emperor butterflies. We've got 50 breeding pairs of nightingales, 20 breeding pairs of turtle doves. So it's a really important site for wildlife in general, and it is the headquarters of the White Stork project, if you like. The two other sites which are involved in terms of releasing birds and trying to get birds to breed are Wadhurst Park in East Sussex, right over sort of almost in Kent, actually, really far East Sussex, and the Wintershall estate, which is in Surrey, a little way south of Guildford, sort of down towards Godalming, if you know that area. So both these sites have small captive populations, and they also have the free-flying birds as well. Other partners in the project that are really important. This is Warsaw Zoo in Poland, arguably one of the most important partners, because they actually provided some of the first storks for the project, which I'll go into more detail later on, but very important source of birds for the project. We've also got Cotswold Wildlife Park and Gardens, who continue to this day to provide us with captive bred juvenile birds every year. So they're a really important partner as well. And the Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation, I'm sure many of you are familiar with their work. Roy Dennis has been, well, he kind of needs no introduction, really. He's been working in conservation, specifically reintroduction of species for decades now. He's the main reason why we have white-tailed eagles back in the UK, and obviously the south of England now. Ospreys, goldeneye, red kites, all sorts of things have been thanks to Roy Dennis. And Tim McCrill from the Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation is a really key kind of advisor in the White Stork project. We've also got the Wildwood Trust from Kent, who've recently joined last year. They're the bison people. If you're not familiar with them, they're the ones that have got the captive bison at the moment that they've introduced, and have the first, if you like, wild-born bison in the UK this last summer. So they've joined last year because they also provided us with some captive bred juvenile storks, which were released at NEP. So why white storks is the big question. I'm sure you're all asking, you'd like to find out this evening. So just kind of looking at a little bit about white storks, for those of you who are not familiar with them. They're obviously a large, easily recognizable species, very charismatic. They're about 1 meter tall, or just over 1 meter tall. The wingspan is about 2 meters, and just the bill alone is about 30 centimeters. So they make herons look small. They're a big bird, really easily recognized. I'm always amazed when people report them and see them around at NEP, and people kind of inherently know what they are. They're kind of a almost impossible bird to misidentify, really. And across the rest of Europe, where they still are relatively common, they are kind of ingrained in culture and folklore. They're as they were in this country, of course, at one stage, but they nest on people's rooftops. They're a very gregarious bird, very sociable. You often get colonies of them in villages, so that the villagers and the local people have a kind of sense of attachment to the birds. They bring the kind of spring. They're seen as like the arrival of spring when the white storks return. But even in this country, you know, although we haven't had storks for 600 years, was the last record of breeding storks, they're kind of ingrained in our folklore still. You know, we have stories about storks obviously bringing babies. There is some kind of logic to that, incidentally, where storks would, when they migrate, they return in the spring around February, March time. And if you go back 9 months before that, it's around midsummer. And that is when they traditionally used to be sort of big festivities, great big sort of pagan festivals and things like that. So all of these babies were arriving in the spring when the storks were returning from migration. That's one theory about why the storks and babies story came up. It was a bit easier than telling children the grisly truth, I guess. But even now, you know, midwives use the term stork mark. So when a baby is sometimes born with sort of red marks around its neck, it's often called a stork mark, as if it's been carried by a stork. They're seen as a sign of good luck and prosperity across Europe. People sort of create models of them, and children have festivals and all sorts of things. And the organisation EuroNature has recently started awarding villages and towns with the title of Stork Village for their work to conserve the species, raising awareness, and of course creating sort of tourism opportunities which supports the storks and local communities. There's a lot of evidence to show that they were in the UK hundreds and thousands of years ago. So there's written records up until about the 1400s. There's fossil evidence from thousands of years ago, going back hundreds of thousands of years, in fact, in the UK, and etymological evidence as well. So this village sign here is Storrington, which is not very far from Knepp, actually. It's only a few miles down the road. And you can see the sign of the village's storks. And Storrington, actually, in the Domesday Book, is listed as Storchestone, which means home of storks. Also talking about stories, there's the Fox and the Stork story. You might know that one. I was actually reading that to my baby daughter the other day. Yeah, just to kind of reinforcing the idea that storks are very kind of ingrained in our stories and our culture. The other thing they've been used for to great effect, actually, where they've been reintroduced across a lot of Europe. So there's only about 2 countries left within their range now where they haven't been successfully reintroduced. We were one of 3, and now there's only 2 left, which is Denmark and Albania. Something they've been really useful for is actually driving habitat management. So reintroducing the storks, creating the wetlands, you know, recreating the lost habitats, which was probably one of the drivers of the species decline across Europe and total extinction in the UK. So the White Stork project in England is not actually a new idea. In fact, we've copied a lot of the methodology from the Swedish project, which started in the 90s. And was basically the kind of the kind of torchbearer for all subsequent reintroduction projects. So a bit more about the kind of ecology of white storks. As I say, they're very large, distinctive wading birds, really very white, very strikingly black and white. They have that amazing red bill and the red legs, which when they're in breeding condition is really red. So the chicks, when they're born, they have a black bill, and it basically gets gradually redder until their kind of 2nd full year, and then they're completely red. So that's how you tell the difference. They're not particularly sexually dimorphic, so there is a slight difference between a male and female, size difference, I should say. The male is slightly larger. The bill is slightly larger on a male as well, but it is tricky. We have a lady who helps with the ringing and tagging, and she's from Portugal, and she's a lot more experienced with just seeing storks every day. So she's more confident on separating the sexes, but it's not easy. They're very monogamous. They spend the breeding season together. They split off in migration during migration and winter, but they both tend to return to the same nest. They're very faithful, kind of more to their nest site than their partner. So if they do actually get back to their nest site and the partner's gone for whatever reason, then they will actually pair up with another partner. But as long as the partners both keep coming back, they will always nest in the same nest with the same partner. But they're very, very sociable birds. As I said earlier, they nest in these big colonies. These are obviously all artificial platforms that have been built here, but you'll get it, as I say, on chimney tops or anywhere where there's tall structures, be they trees or man-made structures. And generally, it's a sort of hierarchy where the older birds will get the better spots in the middle or higher up, and then the younger birds tend to get the sort of the nest around the edges, the sort of slim pickings, if you like. As I said, the same pair will come back to the same nest every year, and they repair it and rebuild it, and they can get absolutely enormous. So some of these nests can be sort of 2 meters across, even 2 meters or more deep, and they can weigh a metric ton. So there are stories in mainland Europe of kind of fragile roofs caving in under the weight, which is hopefully something we won't see too much of here. This is a great example. This picture here demonstrates how the nests, because they're so enormous, they actually provide habitat for other birds as well. So on the continent, you get things like sparrows, both house sparrows and tree sparrows, starlings, and in some areas parakeets and things like that, nesting kind of in the nest. So it's like a sort of tower block for different species. I have occasionally seen this with birds of prey in the UK. I've seen a ringing friend told me about a jackdaw nest underneath a buzzard nest, but nonetheless, the scale of these stork nests is just enormous. So it's providing a huge amount more opportunities, and of course invertebrates and all sorts of things that live in there as well. So once the pair have returned to the nest, they kind of reaffirm their bonds in the spring, as I say, sort of March time, and then in April, the female will lay usually up to 5 eggs, between 3 and 5 eggs, at 2-day intervals. So it could be as many as 10 days between the youngest and the oldest. And then both the male and female take it in turns to incubate the eggs, which hatch after about 33 days or so. It's a very drawn out breeding cycle with white storks, as you might imagine, because they're such a big bird. It's not like a blue tit where it's just a matter of weeks. White storks is, as I say, 30 days incubation, and then up to sort of 60 or 70 days of until they fledge. which actually at NEP we've had even longer than that, but perhaps due to the climate being slightly less, Mediterranean, we've had some birds, it's more like 80 or 90 days before they've left the nest. So you're kind of talking about, if eggs are laid in April, the birds aren't fledging till July. So it's really kind of one shot, really, is all they get in this far north in Europe. Once those chicks themselves are about 3 to 5 years old, they are then sexually mature and they will attempt to breed. That's what we're hoping for at NEP. In fact, for the first time in 2022, we actually had one of our juvenile birds pair and nest. It's a 2-year-old female, and we were quite amazed to see her even attempting. And we thought, well, that's not going to come to anything. But she did actually lay eggs. And then we thought, well, the eggs won't be fertile. They were, because they hatched. And then unfortunately, the pair were just quite skittish, probably quite inexperienced parents. And unfortunately, the chicks didn't survive very long. We had a sort of bad storm, and I think the parents abandoned the nest. But still kind of amazing that you'll get such a young bird attempting to breed. And as is the case with a lot of big birds, they live a lot longer. So again, whereas a nightingale might only live 3 years, a white stork can live 30 years or more. The oldest one known to a ringed bird that was recovered was 38 years old. So they can go on for quite a long time. And there's a lovely picture of the chicks looking like little sort of pterodactyls. So they are obviously kind of associated with wetlands. I mentioned earlier that there's been restoration of wetlands because of reintroduction of white storks. They're not as exclusively a wetland bird as, say, a heron or an egret. You will more often see a stork just kind of walking around in an agricultural landscape. I'm sure any of you have been to Spain or other parts of Europe will be quite familiar with that, where you just get storks in a ploughed field or a grassy area, meadows, things like that. They particularly like meadows, actually, because they're really rich in insects, which is one of their food sources. You don't tend to get them in very wooded areas. That's more where you get black storks. White storks tend to be slightly more open areas. There's a good example of white storks out in a sort of roaming in a meadow at NEP. And they will turn up in some sort of odd places. So landfill sites have become an increasingly popular site for a place for white storks, particularly in the winter. So quite a lot of white storks now, when they migrate through Europe, there's some huge landfill sites in Spain. And unlike in the UK, they're not covered in the same way. It's a lot more open. So the storks can just rummage away to their heart's content and find lots to eat. So it's always a bit strange seeing these really big, graceful white birds roaming around in a rubbish tip, but obviously they're finding plenty to eat, so that's a good thing. So as I mentioned, a large proportion of the diet is insects. You might think such a huge bird, that's quite strange, but a third or more of their diet actually can be just earthworms, beetles, beetle larvae, things like that. In the summer months, particularly grasshoppers and crickets are a big part of the diet. And they'll follow locust swarms around, in other parts of the world. They're very good at kind of honing in on food. At NEP, we see them actually following the big animals around. So they'll follow the cattle and the deer and things like that. So obviously realize that they're going to churn up food for them. They must have an incredible sense of smell as well, because there was a paper published a year or so ago that showed that they can smell a meadow being cut from 25 kilometers away. So there was a number of case studies done where birds were traveling 25 or more, or up to 25 kilometers from their breeding areas to feed in a recently cut meadow, because obviously they realize it's going to disturb a lot of insects. And in fact, we've seen that ourselves at NEP. So we get a lot of sightings from people all over the UK, and we've had local farmers and local landowners say, oh, I've just cut my meadow, and later in the day there were 10 white storks in the field. There's one on a landfill site as well, just to give you an idea of that. Lots and lots of other birds will take advantage of that, of course. Gulls famously love landfill sites, and egrets and things as well. But yeah, they'll also eat, going back to the specific diet of the storks, they will eat larger prey sometimes. They will occasionally take small mammals, toads, frogs, things like that. Something we saw at NEP last summer for the first time was a white stork on a couple of occasions taking a rabbit, actually, which was quite impressive. I didn't actually see it myself, but I saw some photos, and I would assume it was either a sick rabbit or an injured rabbit, or perhaps a young one, because I think a healthy adult rabbit would probably get away pretty quickly from a white stork. But nonetheless, they're doing their best to reduce the rabbit population. So one of the things that white storks have actually been really important about, both in sort of modern times and historically, is teaching us quite a lot about migration, as they're an extremely migratory bird, of course. Very important species going right back to the time of Aristotle. He wrote about how he believed that storks spent the winter in the bottom of the sea or under large lakes and things like that, because obviously a lot of birds were seen gathering on the coast in the autumn. And this was also the case for things like swallows. People thought because they gathered over lakes in the autumn that they then spent the winter under the water, because the idea that they flew to Africa was obviously just so preposterous, and people didn't even know Africa existed at that stage, of course. And then a paper in 1703 was written which describes storks in great detail migrating to the moon for the winter, which again, just it seems ludicrous now. But actually it was in 1822, so just over 200 years ago, this poor stork was shot down in Germany, and it wasn't shot down by that spear. It was shot down by someone with a gun. That spear was already in its neck like that, and that is a South African spear. Amazingly, it had flown all the way from South Africa to Germany with that lodged in its neck and survived, and then unfortunately got shot down. But the crucial thing was, of course, the people who saw it thought, hang on a minute, this is not a European spear. And unbelievably, there've actually been 25 of these. They're known as arrow storks, or Pfeilstorch is the German. And there've been 25 subsequent records of these birds turning up dead or alive in Europe with arrows through their neck. It also gives you an idea of the scale of the bird, because that spear is about 6 foot long. So just makes you realize how big that bird is. Coming up sort of modern times, because they're such big birds, they're sort of 4 or 5 kilos, and as I say, about 1 meter tall. They're ideal for fitting with radio tags, so satellite tagging, ringing, and telemetry. This is teaching us a huge amount, not just about storks, but sort of migration in general. So they're a really useful species for teaching us about migration. So just looking a bit more about their migration in detail, this is a sort of rough map of their European range, or spreading right across into Asia as well. And obviously yellow is the summer, as it says here, and blue is the wintering grounds. Sometimes they will actually winter slightly further up. So some of our birds that have migrated down to Morocco have tended to stay sort of in that northwestern Africa and not gone much further down. But some of them from further south in Europe will go right down to South Africa. What you'll notice is there's kind of 2 distinct paths. So there's some, I'll zoom in on this actually. It shows you in more detail. So there's kind of like an imaginary line going down through Germany, through Italy, and across the Mediterranean. And broadly speaking, all the birds west of that are breeding in Germany and France and Spain and the UK now, they all go sort of west. They cross the Strait of Gibraltar and then down through into northwest Africa. And then all the birds to the sort of east of that line go the other way, and they cross the Bosphorus in Turkey and go through down that way into northeast Africa. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you the reason why is because, of course, they can't travel across big bodies of water. And the reason for that is because they're soaring birds. So this is a digital kind of generated replica of the way they soar. The color coding is really interesting, actually, which I'll explain in a little moment. But you can see how they do it. They form these columns on warm air currents called thermals. I'm sure any of you who've been to southern Spain will have seen this kind of thing in the migration period. Not just storks, but all sorts of birds of prey, honey buzzards, and short-toed eagles, and all sorts of things do this, and they get as high as they possibly can. And then they essentially free fall across those little strips of water. So they don't want to cross great big bodies of water because they lose the lift very quickly. So that's why they choose these narrow points to do so. Incidentally, white storks are one of the highest flying birds in the world. So when they've been recorded going up on these thermals, they've been recorded going at over 4 kilometers high. We've actually seen them going up over net where they've just turned into dots, you know, and people have said to me, you know, how high are they? The great thing about the GPS tags that we have on some of the birds is we know exactly how high they are, but it is often thousands of meters. So this is just a little breakdown of what that color coding means. It's basically to do with the age of the bird. So broadly speaking, the older a bird is, the more experienced it will be in its migration behavior. So what the FA actually stands for on here is flapping activity. That essentially means the amount of times they flap their wings, because of course the more you have to flap, the more energy you're expending, and then you're actually not getting as far as the birds which are just effortlessly soaring up on the thermals. So what you can see is that the birds that aren't flapping very much, so the bluer birds, are quite easily going up much higher, and they're actually traveling much further as a result. So when they get up to several thousand meters up, they can travel 200 or 300 kilometers in a day, no problem. Whereas the birds down at the bottom, can't find my mouse, there it is. So the orange and yellow and red birds generally are staying further down in the column. They're not as experienced, they're not getting the height. They're wasting a lot of energy by flapping their wings the whole time. And those ones tend to stay, as you can see, slightly further back. So the yellows and reds will often winter in the south of Europe. And in fact, with, you know, climate change and availability of food, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of birds are actually choosing to stay in Europe now. So how does the reintroduction work? Looking specifically at the project so far. So phase 1, which has already taken place, 2016 to 2018. This is a bit, hopefully this works. There's a bit of drone footage from their enclosure. So this is the Nep estate. You can see it's almost quite an African landscape, actually. If you've never been, I really recommend it. Very savanna-like is a word people use a lot. Very kind of bushy and mixed vegetation. This area that we're flying over here is the stork enclosure. And the reason why we have an enclosure is because there are about 25 static birds which can't fly, so they can never leave. But at least we're giving them a better life, because the other alternative was basically euthanasia. So these were birds from Warsaw Zoo, which I mentioned at the beginning. They're all Polish or wild birds that were found injured in Poland, so they often would hit things like power lines. They were rehabilitated at the zoo, but they can never be released back into the wild. So those 25 or so that we keep in this enclosure, they're supplementary fed. And the reason for that is because white storks are so sociable. Just by having some storks on the ground, you massively increase the likelihood of any passing stork dropping in. So one of the things that's crucial to understand is the reason why white storks haven't recolonized naturally is because they've lost that sense of the UK being their home range, their natal area. They have this very strong thing called natal philopatry, which is a bit like a kind of home button on your sat nav. And because we've, you know, wiped them out several hundred years ago, all of that data, if you like, has been lost. So although every year white storks will cross the English Channel in varying numbers, usually sort of 30 or so a year will come to the UK, most of them just kind of turn around and go back pretty quickly. But by having this static population, it massively increases the likelihood that they'll actually come in and visit. And that has happened. So actually within a matter of weeks of having these birds here on the ground at Nep, you know, what we presume to be wild storks have dropped in. We've actually had black stork drop in on a number of occasions, which is considerably rarer across Europe. There's only about 10% as many black storks as there are white storks. So, you know, it gives you an idea of how well this is working by having these ones on the ground. This has been done at the other 2 sites as well, I should add. So there's 3 of these static populations. And you can see that the enclosure kind of has a bit of everything they need. There is water. There is a bit of woodland cover and open grassland and all sorts of things in there. So they've got a pretty cushy life, really. And of course, this kind of habitat management benefits a lot of other things. So when we go in there, there's quite often teal or water rails and all sorts of other things in there. There's actually buzzards that nest in these trees as well. Oh, I'm going over it again. So if the next one's going to load, whoops. Is it going to play? This is just a little bit of camera footage. We've got static cameras, trail cameras set up all around the enclosure. mainly so we can sort of monitor the birds that are there, both the flying birds and the non-flying birds. So that's just a bit of camera footage of them in action on the ground. So phase 2 of the project, that ran from 2017 to 2019. And as I suggested at the beginning, this was to try and build that proper flying, self-sustaining breeding population. So again, from Poland, and then more recently from the Cotswold Wildlife Park, we've been getting these captive bred juveniles. They're actually free wing, unclipped wings, free flying birds that can come and go as they please. The only thing that we did was we held them in an aviary for the first year or so, first couple of winters. And the reason why we did that is because it's like hefting livestock. So you hold them in one place. Otherwise, if you just let them go, they'd probably all fly to Europe and never come back. So we want them to consider the Sussex to be their home range. So they're released as juveniles at the age at which they'd be fledging, I should say. And then they're essentially leaving their nest, in inverted commas, thinking that this is where they were born. So this is the kind of thing when we release them that you see. It's absolutely wonderful when you see this year we had 38 released, and some of the other ones that were present at the time came and joined them. So we had about 60 storks in the air at once, and they just went higher and higher, as I said, and it was just absolutely incredible to watch. And by that evening, quite a lot of them ended up in Brighton, so they went straight down to the coast, and then did a bit of a tour of the south of England. Some of them actually came down sort of to the southwest as well, and ended up in Cornwall. And then phase 3 of the project, which is sort of almost complete, it's still ongoing. This is basically getting the properly breeding birds to produce young, and then obviously those young migrate, and hopefully eventually will come back and start and return to breed at net, because the sort of crucial last part of the jigsaw, if you like, is having wild juveniles that have been born in England, leave the UK, and then come back when they're sexually mature and breed in England, because that is the sort of final sort of link in terms of recreating their migratory corridor. It hasn't quite happened yet, but that's only because we've only had breeding of these birds since 2020. So these juveniles, the oldest juveniles, are still only about 2.5 years old. So we hope this year, maybe next year, we'll see some of these juveniles starting to come back and breeding at net, which will be incredibly exciting, or anywhere in the south of England, really. Some water. So moving on to the post-release monitoring, which is a huge part of the project, really, really important. Obviously, it would be kind of pointless just to do this if we weren't gaining a lot of understanding and science from what we're doing. So all of the birds that are released and all of the wild chicks, so both of the captive bred ones and the ones in the nests, are fitted with leg rings. They're actually fitted with 2 leg rings. So they all get a little Darvik ring, little BTO ring, the little silver one, which you probably know from any bird you see with the ring. It's usually that little silver one. But they also get those big blue ones at the top, which are Darvik rings, and they're sort of about the size of my thumb. They're pretty big rings, and those letters are the white letters on them, and numbers are large. They're large enough to be read with binoculars from several meters away, and certainly with a telescope or a big camera, you'd be able to read that number, which is really important, of course, because that's how we're going to get the sightings that we get. We've had thousands of sightings. I think it's well over 2,000 sightings now in the last 3 or 4 years, from not just the UK, but up and down the UK, from Cornwall to sort of Aberdeenshire, but also from other parts of Europe. And for the first time this year, we've had sightings from Africa as well, from Morocco, of birds fitted with our leg rings, which is really exciting. So that, of course, enables us to build up a huge data set of where these birds are going and what they're doing. And of course, it's all about, again, you remember that bit at the beginning about inspiring people and connecting with people. We're trying to get people back in touch with nature and biodiversity in any way possible. So, of course, if people see a white stork, that might be the first time they've seen a stork, and then they might see that it's got a ring on it, and hopefully they might report that, and that actually might be the first time that person's done that. So it's a kind of a building bridges with people. Another thing that we do is GPS tracking. So a smaller number every year, sort of between 5 and 10 usually get fitted with these GPS trackers. You can see that bird down here is actually showing it off on the back there. And we do this in partnership with the University of East Anglia, the British Trust for Ornithology, and Move Tech, which is the company that makes the tags. They're about the same size as a sort of small mobile phone, and weigh less than 100 grams. So it's only about it's less than 2% of the body weight of the bird. So they don't seem at all bothered by having it there, and it actually gets tucked away in their feathers on the back, so they don't seem at all bothered. Why do we do it? Well, of course, it gives us an amazing amount of real-time data, which we wouldn't get from the ring sightings alone. The rings are really good, but of course, it relies on a lot of luck. People actually seeing the bird, noticing it's got a ring, and then reporting it. So we get a lot of sightings of birds where we know it's definitely got a ring because other people have seen it in the same area, but maybe only 2 or 3 people out of every 10 will actually notice the ring and report the number. So of course, it's a bit of a lottery. The GPS tags tell us everything that's happening all the time up until the tag obviously gives up, which is usually sort of 3 years. But in that time, we learn a huge amount. We learn about where they're going, of course, how far they're flying, how fast they're flying, how high they're flying. And we can then build up sort of maps of their habitat use. Are they favouring certain areas? So we know, for example, many of our tagged birds have ended up at these landfill sites I mentioned in Spain. So there's kind of a bit of a habit forming going on, and they follow very similar routes as well. I'll show you that a bit later on, but it's really fascinating stuff being able to see exactly where they're going. So since we started tagging in 2019, we've now tagged 36 of our storks, and we've learned a huge amount as a result. Another thing that we do a lot of is the camera trapping. So just having, trail cameras set up around the enclosure. All 3 sites, this is at the 3 release sites. This is all led by volunteers. We've got an incredible team of volunteers who I'll talk about a bit more later on. And of course, again, it teaches us a great deal about what's happening with the birds. If there hasn't been a sighting of a particular bird for a while and we're wondering, is it still alive? And then it might just pop up on a camera trap one day. In fact, we've found birds that have returned from really quite long journeys that have come back and been rediscovered because they've appeared on camera. There was quite a famous one that was she was nicknamed Doris, and she did a tour of she actually came down towards this way, towards your way. I mean, she went down to sort of Wiltshire, that sort of area of the country, and then she went across to the Netherlands for a few weeks, and then she strangely turned up in Scotland, and then we discovered she was back at Knepp because she appeared on a camera. So it's really important stuff. And of course, we know exactly when they're coming back. So with the volunteers, we'll check through day by day. They'll sort of download a week's worth of data and be able to sift through it all and see who's where, basically. And what we've seen as well is the birds have managed to find the other sites. So as I mentioned, we've got these 3 sites and they've actually found each other. So sometimes they will just move between, say, the 2 Sussex sites quite readily. And we've seen that sometimes happen just in a day, where one will be the one site in the morning and then at the other site in the afternoon. So looking at some of the progress so far with the wild chicks, the actual breeding that's taken place, it's been very successful because we're only 3 years into it. So in 2019, we had the first breeding attempts. This was what was thought to be an unringed male. So thought to be a wild male, completely unringed bird that we didn't know the origins of, bred with a released female. They laid 3 eggs, but unfortunately failed to hatch. But they were, as I said earlier, a lot of these birds are still quite young, given they can live for decades. So first attempt in 2019, unfortunately, didn't work. But in 2020, in that first COVID lockdown, in the May of that year, we realised we had our first wild chicks, which was just incredible. We actually ended up having 3 active nests that year, which produced 9 eggs, and 4 of the chicks fledged from 2 of those nests. So that's quite normal. Often you'll get somewhere between sort of 40 to 60% success rate. So sometimes it'll be around about half what you started with the eggs will be what actually fledges. So 4 fledglings out of 9 eggs is pretty good going. 2021 we had a really good increase, pretty much doubling really, or tripling on the eggs. So we had 7 active nests with 30 eggs, and 14 chicks fledged from 6 nests. So that was a great increase. And then 2022, last summer, that was our best ever year. We had, to begin with, 11 active nests with 47 eggs. Was quite a high failure rate last year. So we had 20 chicks fledged from 9 nests. So it was sort of quite a way below 50% actually fledged. But again, that's quite normal. If you remember last summer, of course, we had the extreme heat. We had basically everything. We had a lot of storms in the spring, which is not good because it can chill the chicks in the nest. We also had a drought on and off, actually quite hot weather in the spring as well, which means the adults will struggle to find food. So 20 chicks is still a great success, really. And we also had our first successful breeding away from net. So Wadhurst Park, our satellite site in East Sussex, they got in touch and said, we think we've got a chick in the nest. And we go and went and had a look, and sure enough, there was a chick. We do all of the monitoring, I should say, mostly from the ground. So our team of volunteers will be doing a lot of ground-based watching the nest. They're looking for things like when the adults start bringing in food, of course, that's a very clear sign that there's chicks in the nest. And when the adults are sitting, of course, that means there's incubation going on. But as a final kind of confirmation, we will occasionally send up a drone like this footage you've just been watching here. But we do it from a very safe distance. So we never go more than about 50 meters, or never closer, I should say, than about 50 meters from the nest, just to avoid, we never go above the nest, of course, to avoid spooking them. So moving on. Oops. So this is looking at how we do some of the ringing. So you can see it's a pretty serious operation, because some of these nests are very high up. The drone footage you saw before, that was the nest in that oak tree, in fact, in the left-hand picture here. And that was actually one of our very first nests from a couple of years ago. And that one is in such an exposed position that we have to use cherry pickers. So we actually bring in these big cranes. Some of the trees, the chap who does the ringing actually just climbs up with a rope, because he's actually a tree surgeon. He's a great combination. He's an ornithologist and a tree surgeon, so really handy mix of skills. But even he sometimes has to give in and use machinery. But what we do is we put the chicks in. I don't know if you can see, that's Jeremy on the left there, the ringer. He takes an IKEA bag up, which is just, turns out, the ideal size to fit a white stork chick in. And each chick goes in an IKEA bag, and then it's lowered down on a rope to the ground. You can probably just about see down here on the right-hand side, there's one of the bags on the floor. And then all of the ringing takes place down on the ground, and the birds are returned to the nest. The whole thing only takes about 15 minutes per nest. If we are fitting GPS tags, it can be a bit longer than that, because it's a bit more of a fiddly process, because we have to stitch the tags on around their breastbone and things like that. But I'm sure any of you are familiar with ringing know that it doesn't harm the birds at all. It doesn't scare the adults. In fact, the white storks are notoriously sort of just docile. They're quite happy to let us just handle the chicks. All they tend to do is go and sit in a nearby tree, or maybe circle around for a bit, but they never abandon, they never attack the ringer. It's not like some birds of prey or owls and things like that, which are known for going for the person in the tree. The storks are quite placid, and in fact the chicks just play dead. So we get them, usually we do this at around sort of 40 days old or so. And the reason why we do that is they're basically full size, body size, I mean. So they're big enough to have the rings and the tags fitted, but they haven't yet developed their flight feathers. So there's much less chance of them trying to jump out of the nest, which of course could be disastrous. So yeah, we always tend to do it at about 6 weeks. And there's a photo that Jeremy took from up in the nest. He sent me that a while ago, actually, when because I know Jeremy quite well. I've known him for years. I'm a birder myself, and he didn't tell me he was doing this. And he said, "Oh, guess what I was doing today?" And I looked at it on my phone, and I thought initially they looked like cows, like little Frisian cows. I thought, what on earth are they? But they are white stork chicks, the first ones to be ringed in Sussex ever, basically, because there hasn't been, ringing wasn't invented the last time there were chicks in the UK. And there's 2 of our team. That's Lucy on the right, the former project officer, and Penny Green on the left. She's the net head ecologist, and they're patiently waiting for the for the IKEA bag to touch down so they can ring the chick. And there is one of the chicks in the bag. You can see it's all very obviously done all very properly, like, you know, following BTO guidelines. Sometimes what we'll actually do as well is put a sock over, if the bird is a bit distressed, if you just put a sock over the bird's head, particularly with the tagging, because it's slightly more long-winded, the bird will just pretty much go to sleep. Actually, last summer I was holding a bird while it was being tagged, and it just went completely sort of limp. It fell asleep in my arms while they were doing the tagging. That was this was actually a couple of years ago. These chicks were ringed, and it was quite a wet summer, so they ended up really mucky. You can see how dirty that chick is. They were not very white at all. They're more like brown storks by the end of it. That's not helped by the fact that the way the adults actually feed the young storks is by regurgitating food just into the nest. They don't feed the individual chicks. They just regurgitate into the nest. And it's all quite mucky and smelly in there, as you can imagine. I'm told by Jeremy that it's not very pleasant. And that's Lucy on the left there, weighing the bag. That's how we, you know, check the weight of the storks. And there's Lucy holding one of the stork chicks, just to give you an idea of the size of the birds.
Do you suffer with predation of them, Matt?
Not really yet. No, it's a question I get asked a lot. People say,
thinking of the flightless ones. Perhaps you have a problem with them, no?
No, that enclosure is very secure. So it's got a 2 meter fence, and it's electric. So there is, we haven't had any. I mean, a couple have died in there, but generally just from natural cause. Well, predation is natural, but you know what I mean. They haven't been got by anything. So, but we think, you know, I mean, one is probably not going to be too long before we have, say, a white-tailed eagle might come and have a look.
Come down,
We've had the white-tailed eagles from the Isle of Wight visit Knepp on a number of occasions. And actually someone saw one lunging quite low over a stork nest. So I think they've probably clocked that they're there. And of course, goshawks are, I think they're relatively common down your way now, but goshawks,
pretty much.
Goshawks in Sussex have exploded. There's about 50 pairs now in Sussex, at least. And they're right across the Weald, so they're really close to Knepp. So on the continent, goshawk is a big predator of white stork chicks.
Yeah, interesting.
So I suspect that will happen at some point.
Graham, the stork that you're on about at Ham Wall, incidentally, that was taken into the rescue centre.
Right.
And it was pretty tired. This bloke caught it up because he thought it was a captive one, and he just put it in his car, and it had flapped around, so it hurt its wing a little bit, but not beyond recovery. It was superficial, and I remember seeing it there. And
that was the last time it was seen then, yeah.
And it was sent back up to the Cotswold Park where it came from. Yeah. So apparently they'd lost it from Cotswold. So
it escaped,
it escaped from there. It was probably one of the breeding program that we're talking about then, I guess. But I saw it there. I was working there at the time, and this bloke just captured it up. He was quite rough with it. Put it in his car, bundled it in his car without containing it. But the superficial wounds healed satisfactory, and it went back up to Cotswold Park. So quite an interesting trip there then for it.
Yeah,
very.
That's a happy ending.
Yeah, indeed, because you don't know what would have happened to it otherwise if it wasn't ready to go, you know, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the sad thing is that I understand that was a escaped one, but even the wild ones, a lot of them don't survive the first year. You know, it's quite a dangerous business being a bird generally. So there's a lot of we do, you know, lose a few every year that hit power lines and things like that, unfortunately. Funnily enough, I don't know if you heard about the ones last year, sort of towards the end of the summer. There was some that escaped from a zoo in near Birmingham, and they were turning up all over the place, and they were incredibly tame because they were properly zoo birds, and people were literally walking up. People were walking up to them and sort of almost picking them up.
So that stuff we regurgitate, some sort of soup, insect soup, is it?
Yeah, basically whatever the adults have been eating, they partly digest it and then they'll just regurgitate it. So yeah, it's exactly like that. It's partly liquid, partly just bits of whatever they've eaten, really.
Yum yum.
Yeah, very nice. So yeah, just looking at some of the juveniles so far. This is going as opposed to the wild birds, if you like. These are the ones we're releasing. So I mentioned earlier that we're still supplementing the numbers every year. The reason why we're doing that is because if we just sort of release 50 and then left it, of course you're going to get a degree of those birds are going to be lost and predated and things like that. So we want to get it up to a good sort of self-sustaining number, which we think is sort of at least 300 or so. So as I mentioned earlier, we're up to about 250 birds now, including the wild chicks. So yeah, it was 24 released in 2019 with 8 were GPS tags, 19 in 2020 with 8 were tagged. 2021 we released 27 and tracked 9 of them. And then last year we released, it was our biggest release yet actually, we released 38 and 8 of them were GPS tracked. But plus, for the first time, we actually were given permission to ring 4 of the wild chicks in the nests. So all of this, of course, has to be done through the BTO, and we get a special license to do all of this. So they gave us permission to do the wild chicks. So just looking a little bit more about some of the, I mentioned the tagging and how important it is for showing us exactly what these birds are doing. So GB2D was a 2019 female juvenile, which was nicknamed Marge, as in stork, margarine. There's some really kind of strange names that people come up with. But yeah, Marge was kind of a trailblazer in terms of what she taught us. She was one of the first ones to be tagged. And her journey for the next couple of years was absolutely fascinating. So both hit play, you can see the time and date at the top ticking by. So that was her first migration. So she left the UK in sort of September that year, flew across to France, down through France. She actually crossed a little bit of water just on off the French coast into Spain, into Morocco. This is all going quicker than I can speak, but she came back into Spain. She spent her first full summer the following year in Spain, then back to Morocco. That's quite normal. And then she came all the way back up to sort of Paris kind of area. And then we think what happened was there was a big storm and she got blown completely off course to the west and ended up on the west coast of France. Because if you look at that white line where she's gone to the west there, just pointed it with my cursor there, it's very much similar distance as if she'd gone straight across to Sussex. So actually, probably she might have come all the way back. Well, we won't ever know because her tag stopped working now, unfortunately, which I'll show you in the next slide. So this was just a little bit of her movements from the last sort of few months of her tag being active. So this was July through to September 2021. So from where she stayed on the west coast there, she summered in that area of France. And then she went really quite far up. So in August, she ended up sort of almost on the north coast of France. And then she tracked back down through France, across the Pyrenees, and into Spain. Stayed around kind of Madrid for a while, and then right down towards the coast. And unfortunately, that is when her tag stopped working in September of that year. So we'll never know exactly what happened to her. Although there was this photo sent to us from last spring, where she was seen again in France. So this is her on a nature reserve in France. It's the first time she'd actually been seen and photographed by anyone, and was identified to us that it was her because they saw her ring number. So it's really exciting to know that just because the tag has stopped working, it doesn't necessarily mean the bird has died. So some of these birds that we've lost contact with are probably very likely still out there. And we hope that Marge or one of the others will at some point return and actually breed. So she's coming up for 4 years old now. This summer she'll be 4. So maybe this will be the year when Marge comes back to breed in England. We'll see. Some of the key data that we learned from Marge, from all of that tagging information, there's some pretty impressive figures here. So that first migration she did in August, from August 2019 down into Morocco, she did that in 47 days from leaving Sussex down into Morocco, so about 6 weeks. She spent 22 of those days stopping over, so she was only actually flying for 25 days. The maximum speed she travelled was 88 kilometres an hour, and the average speed was sort of just under 40 kilometres an hour. That's about normal. The average distance she covered was 160 kilometres a day, but the maximum she did was 390 in a single day. And the total distance on that migration was just over 4,000 kilometers. So as I said earlier, they fly very high, and when they get on those thermal and those currents, those air currents, they can travel great distances. We had some last summer that flew from Knepp all the way to Cornwall. They got to Cornwall. I think they left Knepp on the Monday. They were in Cornwall by the Tuesday, and then they were back in at Knepp by the Friday. So they just sort of literally had a couple of days down in Cornwall, really. So a little holiday in the West Country. And this is just showing you some of the recent movements we've seen of some of the tag birds as well. So these are various locations of tagged birds that have been found in the last couple of years, or where they've travelled to. Some of these show you where they've stopped as well. So that one stopped working down in the Pyrenees. Another one was found near Madrid. We get a lot of birds in that Madrid area, which I mentioned earlier. There's a huge landfill site there, which is really popular. It's not uncommon for there to be sort of 3,000 storks in that area. And then this was a photo taken in France, Germany, of some storks, which shows you them roosting on a pylon. And then just some more recent data as well. So these are color coded. Whoops, too far forward there. There we go. So these are color coded. So the green are the oldest birds, and then the pink ones are the more recent ones. And just some of the sightings or tag recoveries that we've had. So this GB7E was seen on a number of occasions, actually in the Netherlands last year, where it was actually paired up in that country and looked to be breeding over there, which is a bit frustrating when you see that the latitude is actually higher. You know, it sort of equals the Midlands. So not quite sure why I didn't fancy coming back across to England, but never mind. And then some of the juveniles from 2021 were a bit unadventurous. So a lot of them spent most of the 2021-2022 winter in the south of England. They didn't go very far. But we did have others like Victoria here that went down to France, and she looked like she was coming all the way back. She actually went down into Spain and then was traveling back. But unfortunately, her tag stopped working in May last year. So again, another one where we don't know what happened to her. She could be back in the UK, really, which is, again, illustrates the importance of reporting sightings if you see one, because it could be that breakthrough where we realise that one of these birds has returned to the UK. This is a little animation. Hopefully it's going to work. This is from last year. So these are chicks, some of the 2021 ones, and then some of 2022's birds. So just showing you some of their movements. It's quite quick, this, but it will just show you kind of where they go. Whoops. What's going on? Lost my mouse. There we go. Right. So you can see there was a load of them went to the West Country there. Play that again. I don't know why it's so quick, but loads of them went down to Cornwall. Then they kind of reorientated and then left Kent and went down into France and Spain, which is what they should have done. We think that's quite normal. I mean, obviously, we're learning about these birds' movements all the time, but people who monitor stork migration and other birds, for example, in the south of Spain, of course, it's very wind dependent. So what you'll get often is these birds kind of thermaling up. And if you look at the English coast there, it's not very big, is it? And it's similar to this stretch of Spain. So what they do is they thermal up, and then if there's a big easterly wind, they might just drift down to Cornwall, and they'll sort of think about crossing from Cornwall, and then they'll come back and cross from Kent. So it's actually, as I say, quite normal, and it happens in other parts of Europe as well. Right, so just sort of moving on to the other element that I talked about, which is the idea of using white storks as a kind of emblem of nature connection, if you like, getting people back in touch with wildlife. So there's obviously a huge amount of kind of outreach that's done as part of the project, like the talk I'm giving you this evening. We do also a lot of in-person talks more locally, so sort of within the Sussex area around Knepp and the other release sites. With COVID, of course, it meant we went more online. So we've been doing more of these online ones around the country. But we think it's really important, of course, to get local communities on board. There was a bit of discussion in the break about how local people feel about the project. And actually, there was a survey done by a lecturer from Brighton University into local awareness and support for the project, and it was very positive. It was 93% of people who replied were positive about the project. So we've done talks in person to over 1,000 people now. Like this is actually at NEP. This is in the hall at NEP. And over 50,000 people reached through online talks, podcasts, conferences, and webcasts and things like that. Obviously, the breeding in 2020 was a massive event, and you probably may have seen it at the time, where Country File got involved, Springwatch came over and filmed the nest. In fact, the first nest at NEP, we call it the Springwatch nest. So all of the nests have numbers, so we know which is which, but we call one of them the Springwatch nests because it was so famous. Obviously, we use social media a lot as well. We're on all of the main social media channels, and we've got combined now over 7,000 followers on those social media channels. And of course, this is a really great way to connect with people on a much wider scale, and not just in the UK, but across the migration route. So we can actually connect with people across Europe and even Africa. In fact, some of the sightings we've been getting this past sort of year or so have been through Facebook. We actually had a Facebook message from a guy in Morocco who monitors storks. There's a huge landfill site in a place called Kenitra, and he Facebook messages to say, I think I've seen one of your storks, and sure enough it was. And actually he's gone on to report 6 of our storks now in Morocco, and we wouldn't have had that information if it wasn't for Facebook, basically. So it's really important for obviously reporting sightings. It goes back to the whole citizen science thing as well, getting people connected to the project, getting people excited about it. They feel like they're contributing to something. And when there's a kind of big movement of a lot of storks, you can almost kind of follow it through the social media channels. So the ones that went down to Brighton last year and lingered on the coast for a while, people were reporting them all over social media. We also read about a big flock of storks flying out from the Kent coast across the channel. And again, that was, we were able to see that sort of happening on Twitter, if you like, because the birders were kind of live tweeting it. So the citizen science data is really, really important. It's a huge part of the project. These coloured dots on the right-hand map there show you just some of the places. This is out of date now already, but these are some of the places we've had sightings from, literally all over the UK. So from the very end of Cornwall to the top of Scotland, but also dotted about across the near continent as well, as I said, and down into Africa. So it's now over 2,000. Actually, I need to update this. It's well over 2,000 sightings we've had in the last 4 years from birders and birding groups, ecologists, but just also general members of the public, because storks are so recognisable. Very occasionally we'll get a report and then they'll send a photo and it's a grey heron, and you have to kind of politely say, sorry, that's not a stork, but often it's actually a stork. Especially it's really surprising when you get one and they say it's sitting on my roof and you think, no, is it really? And then it actually is. It is a stork on their roof. And we also collaborate with all sorts of other groups across Europe as well. So I mentioned there's other stork reintroduction projects. There's also spoonbill and ibis groups. So we're in communication with all of these groups. You might also be familiar with this group in Spain. So it's actually an English couple, Simon and Nikki, who live in southern Spain, and they monitor migration of birds across the Strait of Gibraltar, and then they do ecotourism and things as well as part of their organization. But it's really fascinating because they count every bird. Obviously, they click the birds that go across the strait every day. And this particular day, a couple of years ago, they counted, so this was 2020, they counted almost 1,200 white storks going across the strait in 3 hours. And we actually know from the satellite data, the GPS data, that Marge was in that group. So she might even be in that picture of this was the picture they took of some of those 1,200 storks. So again, absolutely amazing to be able to see it happening in real time. And the other thing is connecting with people in terms of not just in a scientific sense, but kind of inspiring people to connect with these birds and wildlife in general. So we want people. The whole ethos of rewilding is to kind of get people back in touch and get people excited about wildlife. So storks have an incredible ability to do that. Of course, across, as I say, their European range, they're celebrated in music and poetry and all sorts of festivities and things like that. And we've actually started to see a bit of that in the UK. So this was a huge mural that was painted on a wall at the side of a house in Brighton. Just what a striking image, absolutely incredible that someone's done that. But also sort of on a smaller scale, we get people sending us things that they've done. So these are just some of the artworks that people have sent us. You know, I mean, that one in the bottom right corner, someone just drew that in the field at NEP and painted it and sent it in to us. And it's just great that, you know, we want people to have that connection, to feel sort of an affinity with the birds and wildlife in general, of course. There's a great example here in the next slide. If I just hit play, this was the Brighton Festival last year. They have a children's parade, and this particular group of school children from a village called Patcham, I'll press play, hang on, they decided to do a rewilding theme for their parade, and they made a giant white stork as part of their display. So this thing is beyond life size, and it was paraded through the streets of Brighton. You probably can't quite see, but all of the teachers and the children were dressed as animals. They had sort of deer antlers, and they were chanting all sorts of things about rewilding and things like that. And they named that stork Shirley, that model stork. So we decided that it was only right that last year, when we were going to name some of the storks, we don't name all of them, but some of the ones that kind of do interesting migrations, we name them. And we actually approached the school and said, would you like to name one of the storks? And of course they chose the name Shirley after their model stork. So I'll just mention a bit about our stork volunteers as well. I mentioned them earlier, but they're such an important group of people. We couldn't do it without them. So we've got 43 regular volunteers, all generally local people, live quite close to the release areas, and they just love storks. They're absolutely obsessed. They're so passionate about it. They do all sorts of things. So they come out and do feeding for the birds, the static birds, with supplementary feeding every day, topping up water troughs and things like that. Checking the fence, so the enclosure around the static birds has to be predator proof, because if a fox got in, for example, it could be pretty disastrous. So they check the fence every day. Really important thing they do is report sightings. So in the breeding season, sort of April to September, they spend hours on site. They have rotors, and they come and monitor the nest. Sometimes they'll spend literally a whole morning just watching one nest and recording all of the behaviour that's going on. And some of the other things they do is camera trapping. So I mentioned earlier, this is Kevin here. He's one of our dedicated, very dedicated volunteers. He does almost more hours than all the other volunteers combined, and he specialises in the camera data. So that's his kind of his specialist subject. A lot of public engagement. So in the breeding season, we'll have little kind of stations set up near the stork nests, and the volunteers will talk to people and tell them all about the kind of things I've been telling you this evening. So they're fantastic ambassadors for the project. Very involved with all of the post-release monitoring, and they will also do things like collating data, which I'll show you in a minute as well, because there's just so much that we can't do. There's not enough of us paid staff to do it. So the volunteers are so important. There's just a breakdown of some of the kind of figures. So in January to August 2021, the volunteers accumulated over 2,000 hours, which equates to nearly 300 working days, which is equivalent to almost £15,000 if it was someone doing a paid role. And this is the kind of thing they produce when they do the nest monitoring. This is one of our volunteers, Tim. He puts together these little summaries at the end of the year. So he has pages and pages of spreadsheets. I'm sure any of you who do bird records are familiar with the amount of data, and then he will summarize it into this format, so we can see all of the nests at NEP last year, the number of fledglings, the first hatching date. We do things like the predicted hatch date and the actual hatch date, because it's not always quite the same, of course. Which adult birds are on the nest, and then eventually we'll also get the ring numbers for the chicks as well. So just about all the data you can possibly imagine, and this wouldn't be possible without those volunteers. So moving forward, what's the sort of next plans? Well, more nests and chicks. Hopefully 2023 will be even bigger and better than last year. We have lost a couple of nests this winter in the storms. So I heard just the other day a nest had blown out of the tree, and in fact one of the trees has blown over altogether. So that's a bit of a shame. But last year we lost a nest, and actually the pair rebuilt the nest within about 10 days. So if they're determined to nest in a spot, they will very likely come back and just rebuild it. So hopefully it won't make too much of a dent in the breeding success. So we're planning, as I mentioned, to continue releasing juveniles until this year at least, and depending on the kind of numbers involved, and continuing with the GPS tracking as well, and post-release monitoring, and more outreach as well. So trying to get schools involved. I mentioned the infant school in Brighton. What we'd really like to do is almost do a kind of a chain of schools all the way from Sussex to sort of Morocco, if you like, and have a almost like a twinning program where kind of children kind of learn about the storks and their migration, and they almost like each school adopts a stork. That would be absolutely fantastic to further their understanding and appreciation of these birds, but also just birds in general, because it's kind of opens their eyes to this incredible migration that's going on. And how you can help? Well, the main thing we ask is just report sightings, please. If you see a bird, even if it just flies over you and you're driving down the road and you obviously didn't see the ring number, but if you see a stork anywhere, do try and report it. You can go through the website, the whitestorkproject.org. There's a submission form where you can fill in all of the details, date and time, location, etc. Or just through social media, just send us a Facebook message or something. We'll probably ask to say, did you see the ring number? Because if you did, that's even better, because then we'll actually know which bird it is. But nonetheless, any sighting is good. So do please tell us if you see a stork anywhere. And with that, that's basically the end of the talk. So if you've got any questions at all, please do fire away. I think there's some in the chat, perhaps.
Well, thanks, Matt. That was fascinating. I remember seeing in France, we were at a club trip to Lac du Dour, mainly to see cranes. And we saw this big chateau with a large platform on the roof for the storks. And there's not a twig on it, but on the chimney next door, there's a nest about 6 feet high with the storks on top of that.
Oh, so really?
They certainly picked their spot.
They really do, yeah. It's really interesting at NEP. They've kind of shunned all of the artificial platforms and just gone for the places that they want to nest, basically.
So you do have artificial platforms up, do you?
We have put some up, yeah, but they've not chosen to use any of them. Right. So all of the nests that have been used with all of the wild chicks, if you like, have been born from nests that the birds themselves have built.
In terms of the migration, how do they know where to go? Do they meet up with European storks and follow them down, do you think?
We think that's probably what's happening. I mean, obviously, the more we find out, the more we'll understand. But there must be obviously an inherent, we know there's an inherent sort of instinct to do it. That's why we're releasing juveniles, because actually they have more of that kind of inbuilt instinct. The adults, the breeding adults, which were, if you remember, as I said, they're kind of hefted at NEP. They don't tend to really go very far. Some of them have kind of hopped across to the Netherlands and back, but they don't really migrate. It's the juveniles that have that instinct. So there's something that makes them go south, like swallows and all sorts of other birds do. And then, yes, they're very sociable birds. So the likelihood is they are meeting up with other groups, and then they travel down across Europe.
And just one other question on migration. They come back into Spain quite early, don't they, I believe?
Yeah, they do. So I think sort of as early, almost now, really, January, February time, they'll start crossing. But it obviously takes, as I said, sort of can be 6 weeks or so before they come up. So, but they sometimes are, other parts of Europe, they'll sometimes be back in their sort of breeding grounds by March. They're a relatively early returning bird.
Excellent. Mike, have you got anything on chat question-wise?
Yes, we got a comment in chat, or a comment or a question. Mandy Levers has said that if they're feeding rubbish tips is there a problem with plastic ingestion? Any evidence of that?
We haven't. I mean, we can't. Short of actually catching one or if one's found dead and doing a sort of autopsy, we unfortunately won't be able to know. But I guess there's probably a risk of that because we know that plastic is such a problem, and many birds and other wildlife are ingesting it. But we haven't really had any incidences of birds that have sort of been found dead as a result of anything on a landfill site. So birds that we know that have died, where we've had reports of dead birds, it's almost always collisions with things. So sadly, because they're such a big bird, like swans, they're very prone to hitting power lines. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's not a problem, but it's not a big cause of mortality.
Mm-hmm.
Robin, you got your hand up? Do you want to unmute?
Yeah, thanks for that talk. I really enjoyed it. I had the pleasure of visiting NEP in 2020 and saw the first chicks on that the spring watch nest. Where next, I suppose, is the question though. We've had a lot of success in the West Country here with the Crane project in the nearby Somerset levels, and in conjunction with Slimbridge. Do you think there's something to be said yet, or is it too early to think about spreading beyond the Wessex and the Sussex and Kent area?
You mean in terms of stork introductions?
Yeah.
Yeah, so at the moment it's primarily these 3 sites that we're focused on. We have been approached by other areas, so there's a possibility that we might sort of work in conjunction with other parts of the country. There was some talk about a sort of release in the London area, which we're still looking at the feasibility of. But it may well be in time that there'll be further releases in other areas. But at the moment, we're just trying to build up that population in the southeast. And of course, the benefit of Sussex is it's really close to the continent. It's not very far from France at all. So they're kind of right on the doorstep of where migratory birds are departing and arriving.
Thank you.
Mike, there's more chat.
Yeah, a couple more
Thank
on the
you,
chat. Graham asks, are they affected by avian flu?
They can be, yeah. So I think there have been incidences in Europe. We obviously can't control what the flying birds are doing, so there's always a risk that they might contract avian flu wherever they go. But what we have done is the captive birds we've actually had to pen up and keep them in an enclosure at the moment, so they're even more restricted in their movements, which is really a shame. We don't want to have to do that, but there actually was a huge avian flu outbreak about 5 miles away from NEP. And we're just outside the kind of exclusion zone, so we thought we wouldn't take any chances, because of course if they're out in the wider landscape they might mix with geese and ducks which visit the water bodies. So yeah, they can be. Thankfully at the moment we haven't had it. We're also doing things like foot dipping as well, so whenever we go in the enclosure we wash our boots thoroughly and things like that. But fingers crossed.
Yeah, thank you. Drew Brooke Taylor asks, when he travelled in Southeast Europe and Turkey in 1966, there seemed to be a lot more storks then than what there seem to be now. Is that any comment on that, and how well are they doing elsewhere, particularly in Europe?
Yeah, so they're not threatened across Europe. Their numbers have definitely declined, but they've increased slightly and kind of are fairly stable now. It's about 500,000 pairs across Europe now. And there's a lot of countries where they've been reintroduced. So as I said, there was at one stage, I think, I can't remember how many it was, but a number of countries that used to have them, including the UK, which no longer did. But now it's only, as I said earlier, Denmark and Albania within their range. They're basically breeding all the way from Sweden down to sort of the south of Spain, and even into North Africa. So their numbers are still probably lower than they were in the 60s, but they're pretty stable at the moment. They're not red listed or anything. Black storks are a lot rarer. As I said, there's only about 40,000 black storks.
Okay, thank you. Trevor Hill Trevor has asked, how likely would a safari visitor to Knepp be to see storks, nightingales, and turtle doves? Presumably in the summer visit.
Yeah, so I always say probably go in May if you want to guarantee at least, well, I'd say all of those, but the turtle doves are the trickiest, of course, because they are just very elusive. But if you go on a nice sort of sunny, warm day in May, it is possible, because I've had it myself, to be watching storks on the nest and have turtle dove and nightingale singing around you at the same time. So it is pretty likely, I would say. Nightingale is just everywhere now at Knepp. As I say, 50 pairs this year. 2022 we had 50 pairs, so they are abundant at Knepp now. And storks, of course, are so visible, so if you're anywhere near a stork nest in the breeding season, you're very likely to see them coming and going to the nest with food.
Okay, thank you. That's it for the chat at the moment. I've got a nest. Sorry, I got a question, Matt.
Yeah, go on.
You said about you've got birds on the ground at Knepp, and they will attract overflying birds, perhaps. What's the? You showed us a photograph earlier on of an unringed bird that was breeding in England. But do you have much evidence of European birds coming in and mating with the project birds, other than one or two examples?
Well, no, only if we've seen birds that are unringed, certainly in the early stages. There's one or two birds that are sort of at large in the project, which we think might have lost rings. But in the early days, we obviously didn't have very many storks at all. So, you know, with those first few storks that dropped in, which didn't have rings, were thought to be wild birds. But at this stage now, we won't necessarily know, unless, as I say, if it's a bird that turns up and isn't apparently paired with its usual partner, because they are very monogamous, we kind of know which nests have the one or two unringed birds now. So any others that were to turn up and sort of start a new nest, we could probably safely assume that it would be a wild bird.
Okay, thank you. We've got another in chat. Jill Martin, Gil and Martin has said, you mentioned releasing in London, but what are the issues that entails?
It's primarily the sort of urban setting, really. So we obviously benefit at Knepp from being a very rural countryside setting with there's not many, well, there's no tall buildings anywhere near Knepp. There's no, we're quite close to Gatwick, of course, at Knepp, but it's not right under the flight line. So there will have to be a kind of very specific feasibility study done, which is still not even, it's not underway yet, so it won't be happening anytime soon. But it will be a very specific set of threats or risks involved with that kind of urban setting. But saying that, you know, in Europe and Africa, they do turn up in quite built up areas, you know, and they will nest on big buildings. Someone sent me a picture of a shipyard in, I think it was Spain, where there was one of those dock cranes with a big arm, and there were nests. I think there was a nest on the arm, and there was a nest on the cab of the crane. So they're not kind of afraid of being in quite urban settings, but obviously we'd want to make sure it was safe to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any more questions?
I'd just like to put it to Matt about quite often when a new book is released, I have it bought for me or buy it myself. And there was one last year called Low Carbon Birding, which Matt would know of because there's an interesting chapter in there that was written by himself.
That's right,
and,
yeah.
It's quite funny because I actually had to laugh because I thought, how many people would be hit in the head with a nightjar whilst on a bicycle?
Yeah, it was quite a moment, that.
So I plugged it for you there. So saved you
Thank
doing
you,
it.
yeah.
But it's a very good book. Yeah,
it's good, isn't it? I haven't read it all the way through yet, but there's some
I think
great
it's sold
contributions.
quite well. It's sold quite
I
well.
believe so, yeah. I believe so.
Yeah.
So I was just one of the contributors. So it was put together
That's
by
right. Yeah.
a chap called Javier. But yeah, I believe it's done very well.
It did, yeah. It's a very good book. And a very good piece you did as well.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm actually currently working on, it's a bit of a plug, but I'm working on a Where to Watch Birds in Surrey and Sussex as well at the moment. So that will be published next year, which is an updated version of the sort of, you know, basically what sites to go and see birds at.
Well, you'll have to let us know somehow.
I will. Yeah, well, I
After-
can email you next year or
Mm.
something when it's out.
Mm,
So if any
great.
of your group are in the southeast, you might want to get a copy of the book.
Mm,
Excellent. Okay.
thanks.
Thanks, Graham. Anybody else? Any more chat? Any more hands raised? If not, I'll draw the meeting to a close. Oh, Trevor. There's a clap. Sorry. There is an applause emoji down there. You can pick that
Oh,
up.
great.
So I just want to say thank you very much. It was a fascinating introduction to your project, and we certainly wish you all the well. We've had one of your, I think it's probably one of your birds just north of Bristol for a couple of days, a couple of years ago now, just appeared near a shopping centre and in one of the fields near there for a little while. But hopefully in due course, they'll spread naturally.
Yeah, they should do. It'll take a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need to get them to breed a bit quicker and send a few our way.
Yeah, we'll do our best. I'll have a word.
GB68 was the bird.
Okay, yeah. I can't
Was
off
with
the top of
us-
my head. I can't remember which one that is, but yeah.
Was with us
Yes.
for 3 months. Just
Yeah.
over.
Yeah. Excellent.
January
Yeah, they-
through to March.
They do just get absolutely all over the place. They really do. There's almost nowhere in England or no kind of county that they haven't been to now.
Yeah. All right. Okay. I think we've done with questions. And once again, thanks very much for that fascinating discussion. And we wish you all the best for your project. And I'm sure we'll invite you back again at some point. And you can, when you've got hundreds of the things, you can come back and show us pictures of great flocks of them.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks very much for having me. And hope everyone enjoyed it. And it was a real pleasure to speak to you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you,
At that
mate.
point, I'll close the meeting. A few people clapping on there.
Thank you,
I think
Mark.
everyone thought
Thanks,
that was
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Very much. It's brilliant.
Thank you.
Very
you,
interesting.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.